Welcome back to the Cream City Club podcast. I am Spencer Michaelis, and I'm here again with Gunnar Amelunk. Gunnar, how are you doing today?
We're good. We're back after a little hiatus, and I'm feeling refreshed. But at least I am. I don't know about you. You've had a busier week than I did this last week. So, how are you feeling?
Refreshed is not the word I would use. If I sound weird, it's I'm battling some sort of cold right now, so might be sucking on some cough drops and sounding a little raspy today, but you know what? This is what I pushed through to get you guys some content for the pod. So no, but I'm doing all right. We had a pretty decent week in Florida. 2-5 record, but two last at bat losses, so could have easily been 4-3. And we were pretty competitive in every game except one. So feeling pretty decent about the team, feeling pretty good about that week. A long week, but it was fun. So happy to be back. Not happy to be back in 30-degree weather, but hopefully that'll change soon too. But yeah, let's get into it. So if you are listening and haven't yet subscribed, please take a moment to do so on whatever platform you are on. Please take a moment to also rate us 5 stars. Follow us on Twitter at the Cream City Pod to stay up to date on these episode releases. And today is going to be a Brewers focused episode. So, Gunnar, what are we going to go through today?
We'll be talking about a new opening day second baseman announcement. We'll be diving into that. We got big injury news for one of the Brewers' star relief pitchers. We'll leave that as a question mark, but I think we all know who we're talking about there. Got some new rumors, news-ish type deal here with a nine-figure extension that was turned down by another Brewers star player. We'll dive into that, as well as that breakout game that we talked about last episode. We'll break that down and all the highlights that we saw in that game from our young stars, and just some more spring training updates that we got little tidbits here throughout the podcast. So, Spencer, probably the biggest news since we were gone that pretty shocking in my eyes, at least, to get that news pretty early. But Brice Turang was named the opening day second baseman by none other than our manager, Pat Murphy. First, we'll dive into what it all means around that, but how shocked were you that you one got this announcement that it was him, and then you got it that early? Because to me, it almost feels more like a confidence type of thing to get him going that early to be like, this is our guy. He's going to have a huge year, blah, 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 everything that Pat Murphy told us. But how shocked were you to hear that one? I know we're not big Brice Turang fans here, unfortunately, but just what were your feelings about this move?
Shocked to hear the announcement. I guess I would say not super shocked. Disappointed to hear the announcement. Yeah. Honestly, I had for a while I was thinking he might start the year in AAA. I didn't even think he was going to make the roster for a little bit. I do think you're onto something there with the a vote of confidence type of thing where they're trying to show him like, hey, we believe in you. You better believe in yourself because we're giving you this opportunity and we think you can do it. The defense is going to be there. He is a legitimately very, very good defender at second base. I don't buy the bat one bit, not even a little bit. So I don't see this being a great decision long term, but I also don't think it means that much long term. The opening day roster, we talked about it last time. It can change within days of the season starting. I'm sure he's going to get a bit of a leash, but I don't think this is a huge deal if they decide to go or that they are deciding to go this route and to give him first crack at the everyday second baseman spot. I guess for me though, it leads me to wonder more to go along with the Sal Frelick news we've been getting in terms of him being a legitimate option to play third base against righties. Like it sounds like they're very much considering him being the starting third baseman against righties. I guess that leads me to wonder what does this mean for a guy like Joey Ortiz and maybe to a lesser extent Oliver Dunn because Dunn has an OPS of 876 in spring. I know results. We've talked about results. Results aren't everything in spring. He is striking out a decent amount, so there's concerns and there's things you have to worry about, but he did double off Cole Reagans, who's one of the better lefty pitchers in baseball, in a lefty-lefty matchup on Sunday, and I think if the wind wasn't blowing in really hard, he probably would have went deep off of him. Ortiz is every time he plays the field, there's a tweet out there by somebody who's at spring like, wow, he can pick it. Like he's a great defender. We just saw it in the Angels game that just finished up. And he has an OPS of 880 after going 0 for 1 today. I I guess my question is, do you feel like there's any chance that both of them miss out on the roster with this news? Or do you think it's more my guess would probably be Dunn is more going to be the one that gets pushed out by this, but what are your thoughts on that?
Both no, I would say, as you said, Dunn to me now that I don't see an option for him to be on the team. And that sucks coming from me because I thought I had my first hot take, at least on the Brewers side of things. I thought I could call that one, even though it was a little out of left field. Maybe to some people, but to us, not so much because you mentioned the bat. With Turang, he's made some changes that I don't. They're better for him, I guess. It keeps the bat in the zone. That's shorter bat. Like maybe he'll make better contact, whatever the case may be. But with Dunn's bat, you feel like the potential was there a lot more. Something we didn't talk about too with Turang first before I jump into actually answering your question. I think they elected to Turang first because we have so many question marks with our rotation, maybe, which perceived that way. Actually, the truth, up to you to decide that. But regardless, as the young guys, inexperienced players, whether that is like Colin Ray, we expect him to, we'll talk about him later, but guys who they're not the studs that we're used to having in our rotation, and we lean defense with those guys. So I think we wanted to lean a little defense. We didn't want to lose somebody who is amazing at second base defensively. Just to get a guy in there who can maybe hit with Dunn, which I would take that bet, but I can totally kind of understand a world where that's fine. They wanted a safe option defensively at second base, but I think with Dunn, I don't expect him to make it because if you're trying to squeak in and at bats, I think Jack Stern actually mentioned this too. He talked about how if Dunn did make the team, he'd be as a third baseman, which that's also shocked me too. Which now if maybe Sal does horrible at defense these last 2 weeks and you get some red flags and then it's like, okay, Dunn's our third base option now for righties, against righties. But just with now a lefty option at third base, a lefty option at second base, I just don't see where Dunn can play, or at least real time. And then with Ortiz, I still think he'll make it just because it's the opposite of that. Plus, defensively, kind of the same idea there where you got another guy who can play all three positions, obviously outside of first base, second, short, and third. I was thinking too, even with him, you could probably give Willy Turang can play shortstop too, but you could even give Willy some days off at short, put him at DH, and then you could put Ortiz at short, and kind of give another way to give guys days off, sort of half days off, and things like that. So, yeah, I mean, I think maybe you can speak to a little bit more. Are you kind of the same idea as me, where clearly they leaned more, we don't want to lose something defensively here on this team in that specific spot, at least in the infield.
Yeah, I do think the defense plays a big role here. My only thing, I guess, that goes against that is that I don't know that we're expecting that much from Free Lake defensively.
Yeah.
But I also get that I think they want all of the young outfielders to be able to fit in and get playing time. And if Free Lake can legitimately handle third, and by all accounts, he's doing a good job over there. It's been, I mean, there was a play today. Churio made a pretty bad throw from right. You could tell Free Lake didn't really know how to handle it. He kind of went sprinting after it and then tried to get an in-between hop instead of just taking an angle, taking the long hop and just fielding the ball. That's the type of stuff you just have to get experience doing, and he doesn't have that. But it seems like the routine he's handling just fine. So I think that's what they're doing here is they want the up-the-middle defense to be elite. And like you pointed out, guys like Ray, guys like Miley, they're not going to be big strikeout guys. They're going to need that defense behind them, and this should give them that. Now, in my opinion, Ortiz could just be the everyday second baseman if that's what you want to do. I don't care righty, lefty. It's not like Turang hits righties. He just hits lefties even worse. So I would just play Ortiz every day at second and then figure it out from there. I'd be fine with Monasterio being the third baseman against lefties if they go that route and keeping Ortiz in the everyday and Turang being in AAA. But I'm clearly not going to get my wish on that. So I hope he figures it out. I hope he hits. I don't see it. I don't think it's going to happen. But
How long do you think that leash would be? Because we've seen him now that it's year two. Do you think that leash will be shorter than last year? We saw like with Weimer struggling in offense, Turang got his fair share leash because we have other options like Ortiz, who we want him to play done. Do you think they're going to give him like a month, or I mean, it's hard to obviously predict, but do you think he's going to get this long leash? Because I think my concern with, I guess I can't put this on Pat Murphy's jacket, so to speak, but he seems very excited about Brice Turang, which again, that could be a confidence thing, whatever. But he's he gives me this is me being scared too, but he kind of gives me old school vibes a little bit, where he likes the guys who make contact to play defense fast, like just a ball player, a good and Turang's a good player, like he just needs a hit, but I'm just scared that maybe it's going to be not an RCS situation, but you can get by with one bad hitter. So it's like, oh, well, he's doing everything else perfectly. So we could have a bad hitter in here. We'll just give him a long leash to sort of work it out. But do you think that leash will be as long as last year because we have so many options?
I don't think it'll be as long, but I would say a month is a pretty fair leash for anybody to get accustomed to the season, to get going. That to me is when I start caring about what your stats say a little bit. And even then, I'm still not going to be like, he's got a 700 OPS at the end of April. Like, what? I mean, that's where Christian Yelich was last year, and everybody freaked out. And then he had a good May and June and July, and all of a sudden he ended up at like 820 for the year. It's it's enough sample size to tell if he's made adjustments and to tell if he's any different than last year. And my guess is he won't be, but my hope is that he will be. I hope he does well. And if he does hit, you're right. He does everything else well, but he's not just like a neutral bat right now. He's just a complete negative, and I've seen pitchers hit better than him throughout the course of a year. This isn't, this is a bad bat right now. And if he can figure it out and just be close to average, I mean, I'm talking like an 85 to 90 weighted runs created plus from Brice Turang is pretty valuable. He's probably a 3-ish WAR player at that point because of the defense, because that means he'll be on base more, which means he can steal more bases. That gives him more of an opportunity to help. But without the bat, to me, he's a defensive replacement. He's a utility guy. He's a guy who can get down a bunt if that situation calls for it and makes sense. But I don't want him batting in too many important situations. So I think the leash is going to be at least a month, barring like an 0 for 40 or something to start the year. You know, like if it's insane and they have to figure out something else to get him out of the lineup, maybe they do it quicker. But yeah, I think at one point, the infield is going to have Ortiz and Dunn in it, and less of Turang, less of Monasterio, pretty good chance less of Frelick. I just don't think all those young outfielders are going to hit anyway, and then it's going to make more sense for Frelick to just play the
Hmm.
outfield where he's used to playing. But we'll see where it goes. I do know that Kurt Hogue said today that Murphy said that Ortiz has a good chance to make the team. So it sounds like he's probably going to be on the team, and that's good. I just hope he gets pretty regular playing time, and it kind of sounds like they're just planning to use him against lefties, which I don't love. So yeah, you got any other thoughts on this?
No.
No. All right. Well, let's move to even more. I shouldn't call the Brice Turang news sad, but I'm considering it sad in my mind. So let's move on to more
Well, I
sad
guess
news.
that'll be my one thing too. That was my one thing I wanted to say is I don't want to sound negative. I'm rooting for Bryce Train to do good.
Yeah.
I'm not wishing that like, oh, I was right and he's not a good hitter. Maybe he couldn't turn it around this month, like you said, if he gets the leash and he's a solid hitter and he just needs to be much like Sal in defense. He needs this to be league average is probably not even a good example, but a guy who's serviceable and he's going to be a good player. So I hope he's that good. I'm just not in the boat of I'm thinking it's going to happen. So all the power to you, Bryce Turang. I hope you do well. I'll be rooting.
Yeah. I mean, total agreement here. All right, now on to some real sad news, I guess we'll say. Devin Williams, I think it came out Thursday night, right? That he is
Yeah.
going to miss 3 months due to stress fractures in his back. So we kind of knew he was having some back issues going back to the end of last year. It surprises me that it lasted this long before they found anything like this, but they got an MRI from the Brewers team doctors and they didn't find anything, but they were clearly concerned enough to send him to get a second opinion, and that is where they found these small stress fractures. So both of us have had some back issues despite being pretty young. Um, Both of us had them in high school, actually. So mine was a lot different than what Devin's dealing with. Gunnar, you actually had a similar injury to this. So
Hmm.
I think his sounds like it's to a lesser extent than what you dealt with at the time.
Hmm.
But what do you think this might mean for Devin's future in terms of just overall health? And I know the old saying is nobody used to have a back injury. You just always have it once you get one.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, we've seen back injuries as far as hitters be affected. Like Yelich, when we talk about him, that goes under the rug a lot. And you see how much that affects him. I think backs in general, no matter what it is, it's gonna hinder you. And I'll probably toss it to you at the end of what it's like to be a pitcher with a back injury because I don't know what that's like. But for me, I had tiny stress fractures in my back. I was playing shortstop, which was short-lived through high school. I like jumped on one leg, fell on one leg, and then I just kind of felt like a little like, ooh, that's not right in my back. And then it kind of lingered on, kind of like Devin was talking about. He mentioned it was like all the way back to September. I think he dealt with it. So he's playing with it through a month and a half ish, and then throughout all the off season was playing with it. The Brewers knew about it, so it's not like this was shocking to them. I know that was some discourse of why didn't we talk about this during his contract negotiations? They knew what was going on. Um, but yeah, so anyways, with me, that was a thing that kind of just lingered on for a while. This kind of kept getting worse and worse and worse I had to play it during fall ball, so I kept playing on it, which made it worse. And then we got to the last day and I couldn't even walk. And then I played that game because I thought my dad would yell at me if I didn't play. And then struck out probably three times out of three at bats, and I just could not move. I was in tears afterwards. And then it turned out I had a bunch of tiny stress fractures in my back. Anyways, I know no one cares about that story, but as a hitter, which I was, I didn't pitch. That was super debilitating. And that was when I didn't have any time to rest. Um, None of that. You just had to play on it right away. So, went to the doctor. They said, I think it was also 3 months too. Had to wear this nice huge back brace, which was covered my entire torso, which you could probably imagine what that's like in high school to wear a huge back brace in front of everybody. So, I didn't commit to it every single day because I was again a teenager who was embarrassed. I didn't get bullied because I hit it pretty well, but um, basically they told me is there's not necessarily a perfect surgery. There's not really a surgery option for it. Again, I don't know if that's different because I'm not Devin Williams on the Brewers, so maybe they had like you mentioned, maybe they got some surgery that I don't know about that he can do that makes it better for him. But they basically just told me sit in the brace for 3 months. They did mention pro baseball players actually get this a lot too, which is weird how that happens in baseball quite a bit, but rest basically makes it better. So then sat in the 3 months, it was better, and you kind of just always felt it a little bit throughout my life, but I did heal, and I just had normal back soreness after that. It wasn't like that pain where I was crying at that point. Um, but I guess I want to kick it to you here because that's my hitter story side of it, and I was able to survive. That's not why I sucked as a hitter eventually. I won't blame it on my back fully, but as a pitcher, I know you had your back problems. There's similar movements and stuff, and we talked about how Devin did play through it and was successful for the most part playing through it. He eventually probably got to a similar point that I did. Not he probably wasn't a baby and cried like I did, but um, he was able to say, "I can't do this anymore. Like this is getting too much." So, do you think it's impossible for him to come back and be the same pitcher? Just with your back experience, is it that much a difference as a pitcher versus a hitter? Like, or is it just backs are backs and you just need to heal it and hopefully it doesn't come back? But do you think his performance will change at all? Are you expecting it to after this?
No, I don't think it's going to impact his performance now. When he first gets back, it could, especially since he'll be joining the team mid-season. He'll probably have a few rehab appearances and stuff in AAA, but it might take him a little bit of time to get going. He won't really have a spring training. Baseball is such a rotational sport. I don't think people view it that way, but everything you do in baseball is powerful rotations, and pitching is the same. Like you said, it's when I had my back problem, the time I knew it was really bad is when I threw a pitch and I was trying to, I like followed through and I tried to stand up, like to get back up, and I couldn't. And I had to like push off the ground to get myself to stand back upright. That was when I knew my back was pretty messed up. And it's a really hard thing to deal with as a pitcher or hitter. Now, like I said, mine wasn't a fracture. It ended up just being a tear. I was able to get it healed. It wasn't a huge deal, but it never went away. I would feel it pop up. It just never got to the level of what it was when it first happened. I don't know exactly how the fracture is going to work. My guess is it's not going to hamper him in the future, but it's going to be something he has to be careful with as he goes through the rehab. Rushing back from a back thing is a terrible idea because you push it and it immediately gets worse again. You're probably restarting that timeline. So 3 months, I know that's what they said. It would not shock me if it's longer than that. I could see more All-Star break-ish, which is more like 4 months. That's kind of what I'm looking at for a return date, possibly. But you never know. Maybe it's not as bad as maybe it won't even be 3 months. But in my head, something like that might take closer to 4. So I don't think it changes his performance long term unless it becomes a recurring issue, which you never know, I guess. But like you said, yours never had the exact same thing happen to it. It's back pain, it's back soreness. It's something you can kind of treat and deal with. And we could do that at the D3 level with D3. Uh, like everything we had available to us at the D3 level was not what they have in terms of technology and trainers and everything else at the MLB level. So I'm guessing he'll be fine. But it is, I mean, to look at it from the Brewers' perspective this year, it's a pretty big blow.
Hmm.
I don't think well, I think we have actually talked a little bit about record and what we think it's going to be. To me, this knocks it down a few wins minimally. I do think it impacts the win-loss total to know that he's missing probably half the season. I guess my one hopeful point in this is that the bullpen's probably the best area of the roster to be able to withstand an injury to somebody important. They have tons of options, a lot of depth. I assume, and it sounds like Murphy said this too, it sounds like they're going to go closer by committee, which is what I would like them to do while he's out. Do what you need to do to get to the ninth, and then use the best available pitcher to get through the ninth. I think trying to name Abner Uribe or Piamps or any of those guys a closer just limits you even more throughout the course of a game. Now, you have good depth, like I said, but I think you want to have all these guys available for what could be considered high leverage opportunities in the sixth inning, in the seventh inning. A bases loaded 2 out spot against the four hitter in the seventh inning, up by 2, is gonna be more valuable than facing 7, 8, 9 in the ninth inning. Like that's a bigger spot to be able to use a guy in than just saying, "Oh, it's the ninth inning, we got to use this guy." Now, these guys aren't fighting for arbitration for closers like Devin was, and or Devin is, and Josh Hader was. So I think they're not going to have as much say in going, "Yeah, I'm the ninth inning guy now." Like they're not going to have a choice. So use that to your advantage and use them however you need to. But Gunnar, how do you see this? Do you think it affects the Brewers at I'm thinking it probably is like a 2 to 3 win difference in my head right now. Do you see it as that big of a deal or do you think it's more or less? What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely do. And you mentioned how our bullpen's probably our best asset. I agree with you. And I also think that he's the most reliable in the bullpen, which again, obviously, duh, he's the star of the group. But as you mentioned, not having that reliable guy at the end of the game, well, that changes the whole outlook of the entire game. No, I don't think they should go to like a exact closer, but I think everyone just needs to be a little bit better in the bullpen to make up for that. It's not going to be in a one guy. I think people would probably point to Uribe, as you mentioned, or Piamps or something, who's they're used to seeing them at the end of the games. But um, as you mentioned, and you may have brought it up, or a lot of times our text and what you say overlaps, but you mentioned to me how 2018 is a way that you want to see us kind of imagine or manage our bullpen. Um, I think that was the case even before this injury, but with that now, I think because you have so many moves you can make in the bullpen to fill in spots, I think you can do that a lot better now with this group. And to mention that too, we were talking about how many decisions we're going to have to make with the bullpen of how many guys were in the bubble, if you want to call it that, to make the team get sent down. Do you have to trade one of them, whatever the case is? Now that opened up an extra spot to somebody to actually make the roster and prove why you deserve to be in the team. So in that way, it makes it a little bit easier for the Brewers, but I wouldn't wish that we lost Devin Williams. I do think it's going to affect us. Um, Prediction wise, I don't really care, but just team wise, I mean, I would expect a couple losses. There's going to be games for sure where someone's going to give up a home run that would have been Devin Williams' spot, or whatever the case. It always comes down to um, guys pitching consecutive days or something. Now that we have one less reliable arm, it's going to be even more obvious now, and he's going to give up the home run, and then Twitter's going to go crazy. You know how that goes, but that's baseball. It's 162 games. I do think this is setting up perfect though for I mentioned Brewers Twitter a little bit there, but because you mentioned we're going to get him back at the trade deadline, this is going to set up perfectly for the famous quote of "We got Devin Williams." This is like, what more can we get at the trade deadline? We just got an all-star reliever, which people don't like hearing that again, but it would be true in that instance, especially if we're in first place again. You add Devin Williams to that. Now you're feeling really good as long as he's himself. So I'm not super worried. I don't think it changes us being competitive or anything, but it does suck for sure. And just feeling that reliableness in the back of the bullpen, I think, is going to be a hole that we're going to have to fill.
Yeah, no, I agree. I guess along the lines of the trade deadline, do you think this? I still think they're going to trade him next offseason. So do you think this affects his trade value in the offseason, or is it really just going to depend on if he is the same guy he was when he returns? I guess in my opinion, that's probably where I would lean. I think it's just going to depend. If he comes back and looks awful, yeah, it probably does affect the value. If he comes back and looks like Devin Williams that we've seen since the COVID year, it won't matter. So, any other, do you agree with that? Disagree at all?
Performance will be a big thing, but even before this, I mentioned how he's 30 or will be 30 or whatever. He might be 31 at that point. I don't know where he is, but he's older for a reliever on top of that. So he's still got at least a couple of good like peak years in him for sure. Um, and relievers, no one's ever going to give, unless you're Josh Hader, which is very rare, you're going to get 5-year deals for a reliever. So I don't think it'll affect his value crazy, but you mentioned performance wise, if he does come back and now he looks not right, he's in and out of the roster because he's going on the DL again or whatever, or the IL, I guess I should say. I apologize. Um, then yeah, if at least if the back's even a question mark, I could see that being a thing too in that sense. If we have a Chris Middleton situation of injury wise, he's popping in and out, whatever the case may be. Um, if he's back, he's healthy for sure, back for sure, healthy, at least being somewhat himself. I would probably trade him if it was. I know it's not exactly your question, but I think I would trade him for all the other reasons I just mentioned, even if this injury didn't happen. But um, I think we'll be fine in that sense as far as trade value goes.
Yeah. No, I don't worry about it too much. I will say I would trade him regardless this next offseason. I do think he's going to age really well as a reliever because his best pitch is a secondary, and those types of guys tend to age better. We've already seen the velo drop, and it hasn't killed him. He's got great extension, which means the velocity will always play up above what he's actually throwing. We've seen him at 90 to 92 and still pretty well dominating. Now, he got the velo back last year a little bit, but I don't worry too much about him aging. I think he probably pitches for 6, 7 more years as long as he's healthy. So maybe even more than that, honestly. But I do think we trade him, and as long as he plays well, I don't see it changing the value much. So I guess along the lines of guys who are expiring deals soon, we found out from Brew Crew Scoop, they had Greg Matzik on their podcast, and he mentioned that Willy Adames had previously turned down a 9-figure contract extension from the Brewers. I guess first question, we obviously don't know the exact details of this. Now, this could have been a very team-friendly $100 million deal where it's, yeah, 10 years, 10 million a year. That's not a great deal for Willie, even though it would obviously be a lot of guaranteed money. But without knowing the full details, does this news surprise you in either way? Does it surprise you that the Brewers made an aggressive offer? And does it surprise you that Willie turned down something like 100 million plus guaranteed dollars?
If I'm being realistic, I wasn't surprised that he turned it down because he's at a premium position. We know that he could probably get more than what we're going to offer him, really, in any circumstance. At least in his eyes right now, market wise, probably. Because no one else is bidding against us right now, which is why extension makes sense before you can get to anybody else. That's why it makes it fun because you're like, well, here's $100 million. This is pretty solid. And what if you get hurt or whatever? Your career's over. That's how you mess with me, people maybe, but their heads. But he's pretty smart. I would assume that he knows he can make potentially double. Who knows what the actual offer is? Like you said, if it's 10 years, 10 million or $100 million, well, it's $10 million a year. But yeah, I don't remember what my take was necessarily as far as if we would get one done. I think I thought we would get one done because of how much money we had available at this time. Um, but thinking about it more now and all the moves that we've made since then, I think that I don't expect it to get done anymore. I remember a quote last year in like January. He said he'd be willing to talk and he loves it here in Milwaukee and all that stuff. I think it lines up perfectly with the player, the opportunity. I don't think the money's super out of reach, but it's also to where you can make it interesting. I think it's out of reach if you're competing with other teams like the Dodgers who want a shortstop, whatever. But I think it's realistic, but also I completely understand the other side of it. I think it will suck for sure. And this is a lot different way to look at it, but we've lost guys like Burns and we've able to cope's not the right word because we really didn't care about that. But Hater, like these are guys that fan favorites is what I want to say. Fan favorites and also iffy clubhouse guys, not bad clubhouse guys, but no, don't hear about them as the leaders of the clubhouse. Where Willy Adames is the leader of the clubhouse. He seems like the heart of the team, really in every aspect. Like he's hilarious. He gets along with every type of person on the in the clubhouse whatsoever. Everybody loves him, and a great player too at a premium spot. So losing him will suck a lot, and I say that because I do think that's why we'll probably be a little bit more aggressive, more than anybody else that we'll see as far as players go. So for that reason, because of him being such a good clubhouse guy and really something that we haven't seen specifically with the Brewers yet, as far as players go, I do expect us to be more talkative with him throughout the year. I don't think the door is completely shut, I guess, in that aspect. But Spencer, the other side of that coin would be maybe a trade happens. This could be potentially his last year. We got to be realistic about this. Do you still expect him to potentially be traded? And then the other side of that coin would be, do you want him to be traded? Would you trade him? If, say, that door is completely shut at that point and we're saying this is going to be his last year, we're going to go for it, whatever the case is. Would you trade him and do you think it's an option for him to be traded?
I don't think they will trade him. Now, deadline, everything changes depending on where the Brewers are. I think they're going to be competing, so I wouldn't expect them to move him then either. But if they do happen to struggle, he absolutely will get moved at the deadline unless they're able to come up with an extension of some sort. If I were in charge, I would not move him. I would do the exact same thing as what I think they're doing, which is play it out. I would continue to have conversations with him. Like you said, I do think he's worth exploring extensions with for a while. As long as he's open to it, I would be entertaining it on our side. Now, there's never anybody who's truly untouchable, and especially in expiring. If the Dodgers come and say, we're going to give you some of our best pitching prospects, one of our more interesting hitting, yeah, you probably end up taking it because it's the right move long term. And most of these guys that the Dodgers would potentially be offering would be upper level prospects that probably impact this year's team too. That's what it would take for me to even entertain an offer right now is MLB ready young players, kind of like what they got in the Burns deal. It's I don't see that happening. I don't think they're going to move him. Again, the deadline is always on the table depending how the Brewers do, but I don't think that's going to happen either. I think they're going to give him the qualifying offer, and then they're probably going to get a comp pick for him once he signs somewhere else. But I do have to say, if I were him and I were watching all of the big names and what's happened in free agency this year, I'd probably entertain it more than I would have going into the offseason. You think about a guy like Bellinger ended up taking a pillow deal. So did Chapman. The two biggest starters haven't signed. It's it was not a player's market in free agency this year. And if the Brewers came calling, and like I said, we don't know the extent of the deal or the exact details or what it was, but I guess in terms of surprise, it surprises me a little bit that we came to the table with that and then it doesn't sound like it really went anywhere. I would have thought he might have countered with something like, hey, that's a decent deal, but how about we go with this? And I could have seen that starting a dialogue, but it's also possible the Brewers came to the table with their absolute biggest deal they were willing to offer. He said no, so now it's done. We're just going to play it out and see what happens. I've always been of the opinion that Burns was a guy I would trade this offseason and Willie was a guy I would not trade. It seems like they've gone that direction, that they've obviously gone that way with Burns. I think they're going to continue to go that way with Willie here. I don't see him being moved, but if the right deal comes around, you can't say no. You can't just say no and hope that maybe you extend him. In-season extensions for expiring deals are pretty rare. If he leaves spring training without one, I don't see it happening. But you never know. Like you said, Willie likes it here a lot. I think he's a great fit. The fans obviously love him. I think the club and the organization love him. So if anybody were going to have it happen in season, I could see it being this pairing. But I think if we don't have something by the time they pack the truck for Milwaukee, it's not happening, and he's going to be in his last season as a Brewer. So we're kind of done with. I guess you could consider that kind of sad news too. Another guy that we were hoping to extend. We've been sad so far, but let's talk about some of like the more exciting things that we've seen. Some things we got coming up. Obviously, you talked about earlier the spring breakout game happened. It was yesterday on Sunday. They faced the Royals breakout team. Jacob Misiorowski was the starter for the Brewers. It ended up being a 4-3 loss, but Misiorowski went 2 2/3 innings. He struck out 5. The stuff looked nasty. He did also walk 3 and hit 2. So the command is still very much a question for him. I guess just quickly on him, my concern isn't that he can't start at some point. My concern is that he's going to force his way into the MLB bullpen before he's ready to start. And then it might just end up being that he gets stuck in the pen. I would say like his ETA as a reliever is this year, that he could be an MLB reliever this year and get outs. I think his ETA as a starter is like 2026. I think he's probably 2 full seasons away from being able to start at the MLB level. And that makes it pretty hard to decide what they're going to do because he could be super helpful even in like the Hader type role when Hader first came up. And if he does well in that role, the Brewers might say, hey, this is the best and most efficient way to use him. So we're just going to keep him this way. That's kind of what they did with Hader. But I really do believe that he could start long term. And the level of stuff, I've said it on here multiple times, it's Jacob deGrom type stuff. It is 100-mile-per-hour fastball. It is a hammer curveball, a nasty slider. He threw a couple changeups yesterday that actually looked a little improved, which is good to see. And he even throws the four seam and kind of a cutter at times. I don't know if he's trying to throw a slider and it just becomes a cutter, but it seems like he might have 5 pitches in reality. It's so nasty, and maybe it ends up being out of the pen, and maybe he's just a shutdown reliever where the command is not nearly as important. Obviously, you can get away with a lot more out of the bullpen if you're striking everyone out than you can as a starter. But I'm going to be super interested to see how they develop him these next, not even just this year, but next year. Even if he comes up in the MLB bullpen this year, do they send him to AAA in 2025 to try and get him built back up as a starter? Like, I don't know. It's going to be super, super interesting to me, but that is my opinion that I think he could start long term. I just don't know how the logistics of that are going to work. So that'll be interesting, but he was nasty. Pitching Ninja picked up on his stuff again, and he got some love on there. So that's always cool to see. Another starting pitching prospect, Logan Henderson, unfortunately only threw to a couple batters, and then he left with an oblique, with some sort of oblique, I think they called it tenderness in his left side. Not an ideal injury for anybody, but for a pitcher, when you see a guy leave with an injury, first thought is obviously always going to be arm. So while this might cost him part of the season, like I could see him missing the beginning of the season, anything is better than an elbow, a shoulder, anything along those lines. So that was good news in the end. It was a little scary when he got taken out in the middle of an at-bat, but good news in general on that one. We saw Gunner's boy and mine, Tyler Black, triple to left center. Almost an incredible catch by Carson Rocafort, who I wanted the Brewers to draft last year, but I'm still happy with their draft. I'm not complaining about that, but he was one of my draft crushes in last year's draft, and he made a really good play in center on one, and then he almost made an incredible play on the Black triple, but he tripled, and then Churio was up next, and he lined absolute line shot into left for an RBI single. In Churio's first at-bat of the game, he hit a rocket ground ball that they ended up calling an E5 on the third baseman, but it was a pretty tough play. But it rolled in the shallow left, and he turned it into a hustle, quote-unquote double. Obviously, it was an error, but it was really, you saw the speed on display there. And you also saw hustle and kind of a heads-up play on his part where it was like everyone was kind of just going after the ball, not lazily, but they weren't sprinting to it, and he took advantage of it and took second base. So that was really nice to see. A guy I talked about on the last episode, actually, who popped onto the radar with a really good spring appearance, Brett Witrowski, looked absolutely filthy. He sat 98 to 99 in his second inning. He's the 13th round pick out of Bryant last year. He was 91 to 93 at Bryant, and now he's sitting in the upper nines. He threw what actually ended up just being a cutter for his breaking ball, but he also throws a sweeper, so he didn't use it at all in his two innings, but he does have two different breaking balls, I guess you could call them. I mean, a cutter's technically a fastball, but I guess to me it looked more like a shorter slider, kind of like the one Freddie Peralta started throwing later in the year. So he might just have two different types of sliders, which is interesting, especially for a guy chucking upper 90s. The fastball doesn't seem to have a ton of ride, but kind of reminds me of Woodruff's fastball, where it seems heavy, but he can also still throw it at the top of the zone, which is kind of a weird combo and something not a lot of people have. But in just the three innings I've seen him pitch, he's broken like three bats, got a ton of soft contact. He's very interesting to me. He's the star of spring training in prospect terms, where he just jumped up out of nowhere and looks like somebody who could impact the team within a year or two with the type of stuff he has. So that was really nice to see him again. Cool to get some more velo ratings on him and hear just how much, I mean, how consistently he sat 98 to 99 in the second inning of that outing. And then the last guy we got to see that made at least some news in my mind was Josh Noth, the, I guess it's not the comp pick, it's the competitive balance pick the Brewers made in last year's draft after the first round. It was his first appearance in pro ball. I mean, I'm sure he's pitched in minor league spring training games and stuff already, but his first official-ish appearance in major league spring training or in a real pro game. He sat 95 with the fastball. This is an 18-year-old pitcher, keep in mind. Sat 95 with the fastball, showed the really good slider and curveball, but he did struggle to command them. You could tell it seemed like he had some nerves going on as he was out there. And a guy that I am personally a little lower on, Matthew Wood was catching him and he was not handling the stuff very well, which wasn't helping things much. But you could see the stuff. And I mean, for an 18-year-old to be sitting 95 and throwing two plus breaking balls, he's very interesting. I'm excited to see how he does. I'm hoping we see him in Carolina this year, but it wouldn't shock me if he just stays in the Arizona League all year. But either way, I guess one guy I didn't point out, Yoferi Rodriguez had a single to left against a guy throwing upper 90s. This is another 18-year-old bat who just took a breaking ball on the outside corner and lined it to left. He looks so advanced at the plate. I think he's going to follow this Churio and Luis Lara type path where he goes from the DSL straight to low A Carolina and never plays in the Arizona Complex League. He's not a Churio level prospect because he doesn't have the same tools otherwise, but the hit and the power, it wouldn't shock me if those both come along similarly to what Churio has, which is even if you're only getting the offensive portion of Churio and you're not getting the speed, I mean, the defense should be okay for Yoferi as well. I mean, he could be a guy who's a top 100 prospect next year, and it would not surprise me whatsoever. And then he also had an interview after the game. I talked about this when we talked about that Dominican Academy video, but he's an impressive dude for 18 years old. He's speaking a second language and doing it pretty well. And he has a really good mindset to him. He seems like a guy that just knows what's going on, has his head on his shoulders, and I do see him being someone who could fly through the system pretty quickly. Maybe not a Churio level rise, but I don't know if it'll be that much slower than what we've seen from Churio. He keeps moving up my list just every time I see him and every time I hear him talk and hear anything about him. He's an impressive dude. So Gunnar, I don't know, did you have a chance to watch any of this? It wasn't
Yeah, I
wasn't the
watched a
most
little
well
bit.
produced.
That was what I was going to bring it to this point because I just repeating what you said basically as far as highlights go. But obviously, Mizorowski, I highlighted Tyler Black, Cheerio would have just been the same thing you said. But I was going to highlight the camera work. We did only get it on MLB.com, I believe. I don't think it was on the actual network or anything. But um, yeah, I think we could have gotten a little better camera quality. We could have gotten a little better camera work. It kind of felt like one of our D3 games in somewhere in Illinois somewhere. And I think we don't have to have a big discussion about this, but we kind of already talked about this part of it. But the MLB or MLB, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say the MLB. Michael Barnes, that's for you.
Yep.
Uh, they underestimate how much people really do enjoy the prospect stuff, and I mean, you're literally an example of it for side of it. But in general, I mean, it gets a lot of people excited. I mentioned how last episode, maybe our perspective is a little bit different if we don't have such a good system, but we do. So we do want to see all these guys on the entire roster of a breakout game. Literally, almost all of them we were excited about seeing. So. Just disappointing, I guess, that they didn't make it a bigger deal than it was. It's a good start, though, to get the ball rolling, and maybe they'll see how many people tuned in to MLB.com to watch or whatever the case may be. But um, I just think they need to tap into that. And again, we had this whole conversation last time, but they could tap into that section a little bit more because there is a huge market there that's untapped, really.
Yeah. No, I've told Gunnar this before, but I was always like, I only started tweeting about prospects probably 2 years ago. I was always following them through college at least, but I always felt like, nobody cares about this. Why? Not even worth the tweet on my part. I'm pretty sure it's what made a lot of people who are probably listening to this start following me is that I was tweeting about it, and it made me realize there are a lot more people out there searching for this stuff, but that MLB doesn't do a very good job of marketing it or putting it out there. And I will say the production quality is better in minor league games than in most minor league games than it was for this too. Like it was bad. It was the ball gets hit, they don't change the camera angle until the ball's already down or somewhere else. Like you're just looking at the catcher watching the ball flight. It was not well done. And they did all of this marketing for it and they hyped it up and they probably did get a bunch of people to start watching, and then people are going to stop watching when they can't even follow what's going on. And it just sucks because I do think it was a great idea, like a legitimately fantastic idea from MLB to do this. And then they kind of screwed it up, which is just that is basically the epitome of MLB in a lot of ways. Like, hey, we've got this really good idea. We're not going to execute it well at all, though. We're going to do this completely wrong. And I hope it sounds like it's going to be back. It sounds like teams liked it, players liked it. I hope in the future it's a legitimate TV broadcast that's well produced. Now, I'll give like the announcers credit. They did their best to try and keep people up to date on every player that came up to bat, everyone who came into the game. They're trying to give at least some information on everybody, but it was it was just not done very well. And I really hope that when they do bring it back, it sounds like they're going to, they do it better. And they should be able to. They absolutely have the capability to do it a lot better than they did. So hopefully that's the case. But I enjoyed watching it. Like I said, I was pretty sick on Sunday, so it gave me something to do after the Bucks game and the Badger game. It was a good day to be sick since I had something to watch the entire day in terms of sports, but it was it was fun to see these guys. Like Cooper Pratt got in, he had a pretty nice line drive. It just went right to the center fielder. Eric Batanti, unfortunately, did make a pretty rough error at third base that cost him 2 runs, but everybody got in from the hitting side of things that was on the roster. So you got to see an at bat. I think you got to see two at bats from every single player. So I don't know if it's archived anywhere, but if you haven't watched it, I would check MLB.com if you are interested in watching it and see if they have it up somewhere where you can check it out and watch it through, because you might not get a chance to see some of these guys for a while, and it's a cool opportunity to watch them work and see what they have, at least get an idea of what some of these known names and also some of the more under the radar names have in their tool chest. So we'll move past just the prospect portion of things here and just focus on some of the other spring training news we've gotten recently. On the pitcher side of things, Colin Ray, he is confirmed to be in the starting rotation, first of all, by Pat Murphy. He seems poised to have a pretty solid season. He's doing really solidly in Cactus League play. Jack Stern had an article on Brewer Fanatic, which, by the way, I'm happy I can finally talk about him being on Brewer Fanatic. I knew that was going to be the case for a while. But it's cool to see him writing there. He's doing a good job like he always has. I was really happy to see him get his opportunity to go down there and really be like a credentialed reporter. That's something he wants to do. So it was cool to see him get that chance. He got to talk to Colin Ray a little bit. And in Jack's article, he just kind of breaks it down how Ray said openly, like, I don't have a single pitch that stands out at all. So all I'm doing is mixing and matching to try and keep hitters off balance with six average-ish pitches. And if you look at Sarris's stuff plus metrics, I mean, he is basically six average pitches. Nothing good, nothing bad. It's just they're decent enough to play, and they're decent enough to really play when he uses all of them in conjunction with each other. And I would check out Jack's article. I'm not going to break down everything he talked about there, but I do love a story like Colin Ray. This is a guy who went overseas, a guy who has learned how to pitch. And I mean, while he's not a big strikeout guy, he was pretty close to like the league average in strikeout rate last year, at least for starters, I should say. And he's a guy who has the ability to put up 5, 6, even 7 innings on a good day. In almost every game, he's going to get you through 5 innings of like 3 earned or less. And that's super valuable. Over the course of a long season, someone who can do that every time and avoid blowups and just give you a chance to win is a super valuable pitcher. So I'm happy to see him get rewarded with an opening day starting rotation spot for a guy who's bounced around and been through as much as he has. And it's just another kind of notch on the belt of the Brewers in terms of pitching development. But I do want to make it clear that while the Brewers helped a ton, Colin Ray is the one who worked for this. Colin Ray is the one who went to Driveline in the offseason to work on different things and found ways to add pitches at an age that a lot of pitchers are just kind of content with what they've got. So he's also added velocity at an age where most pitchers don't do that. So it's just cool to see him get that nod. And then the other pitcher I want to talk about quickly is we've probably talked about him every time we've brought up spring training stuff, but DL Hall started today. He looks like a starter. He looks like I don't see him being out of the pen. He looks like a starter. He's got the starters mix. I thought the 3 walks he had today, that surprised me a little bit based on what I saw. His command looked pretty good. And I actually saw his interview afterwards. They asked him about that, and he kind of said the same thing. He said, I don't really know my stat line when I leave the game. And then I looked at it, and he was like, didn't feel like I had 3 walks today. So I feel like that didn't really tell the story of how well he pitched. But I mean, everything looks explosive and sharp, and he was holding up just fine as his pitch count was climbing. He's a starter, and he could be a really, really solid starter. So I don't want to, Gunnar, I got to get you involved in this somehow here. I was texting you about it. All his interviews, and we've talked about it on here before, but he just screams Brandon Woodruff personality to me. And he even talked today about how they asked him because he showed some emotion after a strikeout. Like he came off the mound pretty pumped up. And in his like quiet Southern drawl that he always has when he's talking, he says, I need to have that emotion or I feel like I'm not really out there ready to compete. And that's just another thing that reminds me of Woodruff, a guy who's, you get him off the field, quiet, not very animated at all, just kind of goes about his business. You put him on the mound, and that dude will compete with the absolute best of them. And I guess, do you think there's a chance that there is maybe not a full Brandon Woodruff? I mean, he finished top 5 in Cy Young at one point here, but that type of ability and breakout, do you think that's in there for Hall?
Oh, easily. And you mentioned his stat lines and stuff. I think, speaking of Jack Stern again, I think he talked about he had like 11 plus whiffs at one point today. And yeah, he had a couple broken bat hits or whatever, jam shots, walks, whatever. But the stuff there is easily, it's there 100%. Much like Mizorowski and those guys. Like I just think the stuff will get you, especially being young in our system. I will trust that 100 times out of 100. If you're bringing that to the table, we'll clean up everything else that you've got wrong with you. Um, the other side, though, that you mentioned, the Woodruff side, those are some of the best players that you could have in the clubhouse. These nice guys, but when you actually get them out there ready to compete, it's a flick of a switch where they can go into a whole different mode. You don't even recognize them out in the field because that's how much they compete. And that's what we're going to talk about. We have talked about Woodruff and what it might look like after this injury. We think that's what's going to keep him being good is because of that instinct of him just always competing. So you combine the competitiveness with how young he is. I guess he's a little older than the young guy. He's probably 25-ish, but still, he's got everything in this toolbox to be good. And that's the stuff that gets me excited was hearing that competitiveness, I guess, out of him because That's something you can always rely on no matter what the case is. You're not always going to feel good throughout the year. Maybe we talked about maybe him not being stretched out, maybe to like where he can go 7, 8 innings. But in those later innings, that's what you're going to have to rely on is that competitiveness and just fighting through those tougher innings. Seen a lineup 3 times at that point, which he's maybe not used to. So yeah, I'm excited to see him. I expect him to start, like you said. And today we finally got to watch him fully, which was nice. And he did fully seem like a starter to me. And I think the velo stood pat for the whole time he was pitching too. So that was maybe my one concern. My dumb concern is the difference between a bullpen pitcher and a starter. If because he's been only in the bullpen, will that take a huge dip after the third inning, fourth inning, whatever? And it doesn't seem like that's going to be the case too. So yeah, I'm excited about him for sure.
Yeah, I'm trying to find. He faced 17 hitters. I can't find a pitch count anywhere. I forgot they kind of don't do real pitch tracking for spring training
Hmm.
unless it's on a Statcast field. So I don't think we'll be able to find that out, but it might have been showing on the ticker during the game. So I'd be curious to go back. I think he got into the 80s, which to me, I mean, they're stretching him to be a starter. He's
Yeah.
going to start. I'd be absolutely shocked if he's not in the rotation to start the year. So
He's got one more start too this spring, I assume.
yeah, he
Yeah,
should have one
so
more. It, yeah, I would at least one, but I would think probably only one. Um, yeah, I mean, he's on pace to probably start in that first series, I think is how it would
that's what I
line
was
up.
thinking. If we're 10 days out right now, you imagine, I mean, if you go 5 days of rest, obviously, but it's going to be a little bit more than that. But yeah, you'd think they're doing it so he's ready for that first 3 game, whatever, 4 day series, but three
Yeah,
game series.
yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I'm super excited about him. I'm excited about him and Ortiz. Every time I see him, I get more excited about him. I really do think they killed this trade. Maybe I'll be proven wrong, but from the beginning, I've been pretty excited, and they are not doing anything to temper my enthusiasm every time I see him. But I guess not really speaking of Ortiz, but speaking of young hitters, Gunner, you mentioned Turang's kind of swing change earlier, but you didn't dive too deep into it. We've seen pretty much all the returning freshmen, is what we're calling them, outside of, I guess you would say, Freelick, who doesn't look to have changed much. They've
Mhm.
all come back with revamped setup swings, whatever you want to call it. I guess which of them are making you feel better about the players? Which of them maybe haven't changed your opinion? And what are you seeing with Mitchell, Weimer, and Turang?
Yeah, let's go down the line here. I think Mitchell first. Um, he hasn't changed much for me because his problems, to me, the biggest one would be swing decisions in general. Looking at his stats, which we don't care about, but this is one that you can point to in spring training was strikeouts, and that's one you pointed out too. I think he's got like 12 and like 40-ish at bats. Not crazy, crazy, but I mean it's still high. Um, I don't his swing has definitely changed a little bit this time around, and today he had a couple hits too that looked nice. He's kind of weird because he seems like he's got a decent eye to me. It's just when he gets to 2 strikes, he changes his approach a little bit and tries to really just be a hitter instead of just relaxed, whatever that means. But um, that was something that impressed me when we called him up originally when I wasn't even that high in him. I'm like, he's actually got a pretty good eye, which is shocking to me. Um, but yeah, he's gonna have to cut down the strikeouts. His swing to me looks fine. That's why I kind of believe in him because I like his swing that much. He had a hitch early on in his career that I didn't love because I think it just kind of throws you off a little bit, but he's been able to correct that. Um, I think the swing allows him to tap into a little bit more power too. Hopefully, that's probably the idea with it. He can kind of get back into his hip a little bit and this could be in a better path more often than not. But that with that comes with strikeouts. So hopefully he can find that medium that we were talking about. I know a couple episodes, that's what I was theorizing at least was maybe him trying to get into too much power is what causes strikeouts. But I know the hole in his swing is as far as like a strike zone map would probably be the high pitch, which I don't think it's a Castanheira type hole where it's like this guy cannot even touch this. This is just throw a high fastball every time. He's not going to hit it. I don't think it's that bad, but he's going to have to correct that. And with swing decisions, um, I totally see the concerns and everything, but I will keep my Garrett Mitchell stock very quiet. I told you I'm going to be very secretive about it because I don't want to be too loud, but I'm excited about him at least I think he's a ball player, which again, that's not even a thing that you can point to. I just think he's a good baseball player. He always has been a good baseball player. There's probably something to that. He seems like he has a lot of confidence too. Um, I always joke how he's maybe like the leader of all these young guys. They probably view him as like the leader of them. I don't know what that means necessarily, but he's a guy who got called up first. The way he carries himself, I like the whole package. Just hopefully cut down on the strikeouts and we'll be good. Um, Joey Weimer. I got a spring training stat for you I just saw, which might shock you a little bit, but he has zero extra base hits so far in spring training,
I
which,
was literally just looking at that, thinking the same thing.
and I was floored by that when you were talking that. I'm like, what the, if, like, what? How does he have zero extra base hits after all the changes he's made? But we saw him today. Actually had a pretty good swing in his first at bat. He smoked one in the center field that he just missed. Um, But in his next couple at bats, he dropped his hands again and then he rolled over, and that's kind of the Joey Weimer experience. So I think he'll be more consistent without the whole first part of his swing where he's basically smacking the knob of his bat off his hip and then going to hit. He's eliminated that, which is good. He just needs to relax, get your bat in a good path. You have so much power. That's all you need to do is connect and get it on a good path. You don't need any extra help with your swing to get more power. Easier said than done. He's just getting rid of the hitch that he did have is probably astronomical for him in his mind. So I totally understand it. But I was completely shocked by no extra base hits so far. So I don't know if that will concern him as far as like making a roster or something. If that's something that they're like, oh no, we expect this guy to have some power. That's maybe why I mean, his defense obviously is incredible too, and he's a righty, which makes him different than all the other people on as far as the outfielders outside of Jackson. But yeah, that's concerning to me because we wanted him to have a little more power this year and not to have any sort of sign of that outside of maybe a fly ball today, which I'm excited about. That's concerning to me. So, the last one, which we can go quick and we can maybe circle back to Joey if you got a comment on it, but Turang, I noticed the first thing today though he's choking up, which I hate. He's got a lot less movement than normal. His bat path's a little bit better. I know he used to have sort of a Christian Yelich type of stance, which is kind of had like a vertical. His hands are out and it's vertical bat, and then it's hard to go around and get in a good path, which Christian can do it because he's really good and he's athletic and he knows his swing really well. Eliminating all of that may help Turang, but um, choking up to me almost just feels like you're basically saying, I just want to make contact and then use my speed to get on base, which, okay, I guess if you can get lucky on that, I just think you're betting a lot on luck and not so much hitting the ball hard and for line drives and just letting your odds play out and being a good hitter overall. So, um, yeah, I mean, that's basically it on him. Like I said, I'm hoping he does good now. We know he's going to be there on the team for at second base. So hopefully that whatever he did will help him get hits and get on base because we saw him get a stolen base today too. He can do a lot of stuff when he's on base. We know that. So I think this team's going to run too, which Mitchell too, get on base for him. He's going to steal. Weimer's fast. Get on base, you're going to steal. So, and then Free, like what you mentioned, I don't see any really differences with his swing at all. He's a good hitter. I think he's hitting like 300 right now. Again, I don't care about stats, but he's always going to hit, and he just needs to get comfortable. And I'm not going to worry about him hitting whatsoever. So, do you think there's anything to wrap up my little part there to circle back to Joey? Is there anything to? Is there an eyebrow raised to the fact that would you be shocked as a coach if you're in the front office, like, oh my God, this guy has zero extra base hits? Does that affect his roster spot at all, or you think all they care about is defense and that he's a right-handed hitter?
I think being righty definitely helps his case. I do think Blake Perkins is going to have a real shot at making the roster. And with Weimer not hitting well, it wouldn't shock me if they send him to AAA to play every day and just make Perkins the guy who faces lefty pitchers. You can get by with Yelich against lefties in the outfield, so it's not like an outfield of Yelich, Churio, Perkins against lefties would be some awful lineup to run out there. It'd be fine. I, I'm not super worried about the extra base hits thing. By all accounts, from people who are there, they've said he's hit into a ton of hard outs, including liners into the outfield and stuff. it does feel like he might be having a harder time getting to that launch angle with this new approach. And that was the issue in college, if people remember. The reason he was a fourth round pick and not earlier is because he hit the ball super hard, but he hit it on the ground and he hit it on a line and he never really could get under the ball. And then he made all his adjustments in Pro Bowl and started elevating. I worry a little bit that he might revert back to not being able to elevate the ball, but it's also like what, 30 some plate appearances in spring training with his
Yeah.
new 40 some, like 45 plate appearances in spring with his new approach. That's why I think it might make more sense to go to AAA, just get him more at bats without the pressure of having to perform at the major league level. And you can get by with the Perkins, like I said. Um, that might even be a way to carry an Eric Haas because he's played some corner outfield and stuff before, but I'm not super worried about him. You did mention Christian Yelich, though, and I would like to talk quickly about Christian Yelich. Uh, absolutely launched a ball today. Both his homers in spring are pull side, which is really, really nice to see. That's as good a sign as anything that he's starting to feel comfortable. I mean, the OPS is 1054 now in spring. That's not a huge deal. He's really only walked once. He hasn't played that much, but seeing him pull the ball with power at any point will always get me a little amped up. And hopefully we're seeing the guy that we've hoped we would get for a while. I don't think he's MVP Yelich, but I will maintain that All-Star Yelich is still a very real possibility. But Gunnar, I do have to ask you, since I do trust you on these swing things. He's obviously performed pretty well in spring. We saw the pull side power. Does it look any different to you than what you were seeing in games last year? I know you probably have only gotten to see this home run, and obviously a
Hmm.
home run is going to look pretty good usually, but he did have 4 at bats today and obviously kind of a cheap double, but he went 3 for 4. So you see anything that makes you feel any better, or does it look pretty much the same to you still?
Yeah, I think it does look better. There's a lot less movement, which is what we are hoping for with the hands specifically. Um, and more so than even the young guys that I was talking about, he's a guy we've seen him perform. We know what he can do when he hits it. He hits the ball hard all the time. We know you can do it, so just put yourself in the best position. And spring training is maybe not the best example of that because you're facing lesser pitchers or whatever, but that was a major league pitcher. I forgot what was that guy's
Griffin
pitching.
Canning.
Yeah, so like he's gonna be in the big league. So
Yeah.
um it's a good competition and I mean he turned on it and he smoked it. So I expect him to be good in an all-star level. And we mentioned back health. I mentioned Christian Yelich all the way back there in that conversation. Um and now if you would have had this conversation with me last year at this time, the back was a question mark, but I'm like, all right, like we haven't a good excuse, buddy. Like we have seen it, but now we saw last year where he was performing really well up into the back injury, and then we saw it dip off. So I do think that's his biggest hurdle now that he has to overcome is the injury, which you can't control that all the time. I understand that. We're seeing that with I mentioned Chris Middleton in this podcast. You can't control injuries all the time, but all I can control is when you're out there and you're healthy, how do you look? And for both of those guys, I know it's on the Bucks podcast, they look good. So um, just health with him is all I really care about right now. How do we put him? I think you mentioned Kirk all the time on this podcast. He tweeted like put him in bubble wrap. That's basically how my opinion is right now of him is just keep him healthy to the playoffs. And we should be good to go with him.
Yep. If you wear number 22 in Milwaukee, I will love you and you will probably break my heart with some injuries, but I will always back you up. So keep that in mind. Michael Wright even had a ton of injuries. It's not a curse number because they are good players, but health wise, it seems to have it holds some bad
We're
juju.
gonna have to deep dive this tonight now because now
Yeah,
I'm
we
gonna go
might make
back on
like a
another
4-part
22s.
YouTube special on this, so just keep an eye out for no. No, I don't know, man. I've been excited generally about what I've heard and seen in spring this year. So I think next time, like we talked about on the last one, we're getting pretty close. I think next time we're gonna do our kind of roster predictions. We'll go back and forth on that. We'll talk about kind of wrapping up what we've seen in the end, and then who knows what'll happen between now and then. I did not expect 3 months of no Devin Williams when we last recorded, so you never know what's going to happen from this week to next week. But I think we can wrap this one up with our random Brewers. So Gunnar, why don't you start us off on that?
I was stuck between a couple of guys, and I eventually went with Taylor Williams, a guy everyone knows I'm not a pitcher guy, but I was really excited about him when he came up in 2017. You could tell right away his stuff. That's pretty much all I noticed for pitchers is how good your stuff is, and I'm like, this guy's gonna be a stud. Holy crap, he's got so much good stuff. And then 2018, he got a little bit more run, um, had some ups and downs that year, and I'm like, okay, he's gonna finally put it together. And then he was horrendous in 2019. Um, I mean, you could probably break down why he was horrendous. I'm sure there's a very obvious thing, maybe straight fastball, whatever. He threw a hard fastball. Um, but yeah, I was just shocked that his career path went the way that it did. I thought that was another guy that we found a little older, a guy who was through the system for a while. I don't know if he had injuries or whatnot. I just remember him being in the system for a couple of years there for longer than normal. Um, and then he eventually came up and did what he did. So was disappointed, I guess, but we did get a good few moments of him. And 2018, he did pitch pretty well, I guess. In 2018, he had a 4.25 ERA. I thought he was worse than that. So yeah, that's pretty much. I don't have any specific memories of him. Just outside of that, I was very impressed by his stuff, and it just didn't work out.
Yeah, I was pumped about him coming up. I remember his debut. I was locked in on the TV, ready to watch him pitch, and the stuff was good.
Oh
I
yeah,
had
he
no
missed
clue.
2 years.
Yeah, he had injury problems. Even coming through the system, it was always a concern
Yeah.
with him. So I mean, teams kept taking chances on him until he just didn't have any health left, pretty much. So I think the stuff was good. He probably just didn't command it super well and couldn't stay healthy. Um, I went with a 1 year wonder for the Brewers, kind of, in Zach Duke, who he was here in 2014. He was a big part of the great start in 2014. He, I remember him like as a starter against the Brewers when he was with the Pirates, and he was not a strikeout pitcher whatsoever when he was a starter. I mean, I'm looking right now, strikeouts per nine, he was never above 6.6 before 2014. And then he struck out 11.4 per nine for the Brewers in 2014 and posted a 2.45 ERA, a 2.14 FIP. So nothing was pointing to this being a fluke at all. Like he was legitimately dominating that year. The Brewers let him go in free agency the next year. He actually had a pretty solid run through 2018 at the age of like 35. He didn't have an ERA above 3.93 in that span, but he fell off in 2018 and 19 a little bit, and then he retired because he was 36. But I just remember in 2014, it almost sucked that the Brewers performed so well in that first half because he probably was one of the more valuable trade assets at the deadline. Like somebody
Mhm.
having that good of a season, a lefty reliever, Brewers probably would have got a decent haul for him, but obviously they were winning a bunch of games, so they decided to go out and add instead, and then it didn't work out very well. And that's when Ron Arenike basically started losing his job. He just got to make it into 2015, and then we hired some other guy. I don't remember what happened to him, but now we have Pat Murphy. So no, but Zach Duke in that season was just utterly dominant. I couldn't believe it at the time, and I really can't believe it looking back and seeing what he had done up until that point. There was no sign that he was suddenly going to become a big time strikeout reliever. And even back in the day, I guess the Brewers had some sort of pitching lab going on because they were creating a dominant reliever out of nowhere. But yeah, that's mine. For those of you listening, please like and subscribe on whatever platform you are on. Remember to follow us on Twitter at the Cream City Pod. Please feel free to leave feedback for us on how we can get better. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you next time with a Bucks podcast.
See ya.